to start by saying thank you so much for coming and sharing your time and investing. I'm so looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you for thinking of me and this opportunity just to have this conversation, but share a little something. So hopefully your audience will enjoy what we have to say with one another.
Thank you so much. And I want to start by saying I also really appreciate our friendship and your mentorship, and also just being a part of what you're doing. And so I really value that. So thank you so much for being who you are.
Well, Jay, I've been a big fan of yours since I first saw you speak at a C3 leadership conference. And you know, you're a still young
Yes.
entrepreneur, very successful, but you really have a great vision really for life. And the fact that you're able to share that through a medium like this is really awesome. So I'm really happy to be here. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for your kind words. I think I'd like to start by, even for myself, but for people that are joining us today, watching this video, can you explain exactly what you do and what your title is and what that whole world is about? For me, I'm not too familiar with politics and government positions.
Yeah.
So can you kind of highlight some of that so that we can be educated?
I mean, I still, when people say senator, when they call me, it takes me a little bit aback to think, well, this is what I do. So
Right.
It's almost been 15 years since I was appointed in 2009. But, the Senate is an amazing institution that's part of our parliamentary system.
Yes.
And so at the federal level, we have two houses, the House of Commons, which is the elected body,
Yes.
and then the Senate, which is an appointed body. So I was appointed by Prime Minister Stephen Harper. I did run to be an MP. It was in 2008. That's a whole separate story. But in terms of just my work as a senator, what I have, like how I explain my position is that, we're appointed, so we're held to a very high level of accountability, transparency, and responsibility. People expect a lot because we don't have to seek re-election with the electorate. So I know that I need to just cross every T, dot every I, do my work very diligently.
Yes.
But the other thing is we're not in one particular riding. Like across Canada, we have 338 ridings where MPs are elected.
Yes.
But as a senator, I'm a BC senator. I'm a Western Canadian. I'm a woman, so there are people across Canada who I represent just by my gender. And then, of course, being of Korean descent, I'm the only Korean Canadian parliamentarian right now in Ottawa. So I can represent national constituents. And one of my most important groups are the veterans of the Korean War.
Yes.
Like you, and neither of us would be here, most likely, had Canadians and others not gone. So that's a whole separate discussion too. But I get to sort of work with these national groups, regional groups, and see the country at 40,000 feet as a senator, literally going, to Ottawa back and forth, but really looking at the whole of our country, and then going into the minutiae, the little cracks and crevices, the jurisdictional, challenges that people naturally have.
Yes.
So I get to work from a very small, like on the ground, all the way up to have that 40-foot perspective. So I feel like I have one of the most amazing, opportunities to serve my country in my role as a senator.
Amazing. So, just off the top of my head, how many times on average do you travel to Ottawa per year?
So it's kind of like school.
Yes.
So September to June, we are in session in Ottawa. So I'm going to go back to Ottawa in a few weeks in September. But in a given month, anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks, I'm in Ottawa. I do go back and forth. So it kind of turns out to maybe about 6 months out of the year that I'm away from home.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow,
so
that's a commitment.
It's
a
we
service.
live in a huge
Yes.
country, so it's like 3-hour difference.
Yes.
I start my day fairly early, so it's really early in BC. So it's a bit of an adjustment, each week when I do that. But yes, it's a big commitment, but it's something that I feel really privileged to do.
Amazing. How many Asian senators are there? Of Asian descent?
We're a minority.
Yes,
I can say
definitely.
that. So in the Senate, when you look at, there's a few South Asian senators. There's myself and another Chinese Canadian. There are some people of color overall, but it's still a minority in Ottawa, and
Yes.
that's the same whether it's in bureaucracy or on the other side of the house. Like
Yes.
there are few Asian Canadians like me.
Yes.
So I know that when I first got to Ottawa, I really felt like a minority, but I'm seeing a little bit more visible minorities in office and doing work. So it has improved overall. But I think most Asian communities still are building the community. They're still in that first stage, the pioneering stage. So, people of your generation and after us, like your son and others,
Yes.
we're going to see more Asians getting, participating in politics. But we're still a minority, I would say, overall.
Definitely. I can only imagine. But I'm really curious of when you came to Canada. Do you remember that?
I remember it
Yes.
very clearly.
So can you kind of give us some background of when and how?
Yeah, it's actually quite clear in my mind. I was 7, so it was on my birthday. I was born April 11th, 1965. So on my 7th birthday, we were leaving for Canada. So of course, leading up to that departure, my father had already gone to the United States to study, and after about a 2.5-year separation, we were being reunited. He decided to settle in Canada instead of the U.S., so I could easily have been an American instead, but my father chose to come to Canada. We had relatives here. So on my 7th birthday, I remember, at home seeing my grandfather, who I feel emotional just even thinking about it. But we were living with my grandfather and my ajumma, the woman who, lots of in Korea there's lots of people that work in the home. So
Sure.
this ajumma whom I had known since birth. So neither of them went to the airport with us. It was my mom's friends who were there and met us. So my 2 younger siblings, my 18-month-old sister, my 4-year-old brother, and myself on my 7th birthday, saying goodbye to my grandfather and ajumma, whom I had known my whole life, and just seeing the sadness on their faces. I still remember knowing that as a 7-year-old, and I had like 2 puttaris in my hand.
Yes.
It's wrapped in
Sure.
cloth, and
Yeah.
the possessions that we were taking to Canada. So I had, as a 7-year-old, 2 puttaris on either hand, and I was in charge of my little brother because my mom was carrying my sister and had a puttari in her other hand. So that day at the airport, just leaving Korea, not knowing where we were going to, but I knew I was going to see my father. So that plane ride, for me, what I remember is just the anticipation of wanting to see my father again and rehearsing what I was going to say to him. But I remember when we did finally land in Vancouver, and he was standing in front of me a little bit ways away. Like, he just looked different, in the eyes of a 7-year-old after being separated for 2.5 years. So much has changed. So all the words I had rehearsed just got stuck, and I couldn't say anything. And my father came and gave me a hug. And I remember just being in his arms and just that reunion. So so I left on my 7th birthday, and I arrived in Canada on my birthday.
Wow.
So my parents always said Canada was my 7th year, birthday present.
Wow. You remember what city you landed in?
Well, it was at the Vancouver, International Airport.
Yes. Because as you share that story, the age of 5 and 7, very formative.
You were 5 when you...
No, I was 6 months old when I came.
You were 6 months.
Right.
Okay, yes.
So I was just a little baby when I came to Canada, but because I have 4 kids, and so 5 and 7 are some really formative years. Yeah, and I can only imagine back in like the 70s, late 1960s, early 70s. Like we don't have communication like we have now, like the convenience of like apps and and video calls and stuff like that. So that 2.5 years separation it's like a real separation, right? And
Yeah, there's, I have see, I'm going to get quite emotional if I talk about this, but I'll do my best to share the story rather than, feel my emotions, but that's how raw it feels to me.
Yeah,
But
yes.
I remember after my father passed away in 2008, we found in this bag at the bottom of his closet, we almost ended up throwing it out, but in it were letters that he had kept of the time when he was separated from us. So in that bag, there's a letter from my mother written on Christmas Day that he must have, in those days, the letter was one piece of paper that you had to fold and glue the ends. So it had to be a certain weight, so you couldn't write more than what could fit on that one piece of paper. I don't know if you've ever seen that. So there was a letter from my mother. She had written in the tiniest print you could possibly imagine, but so perfectly straight. And my father must have received that post-Christmas because she wrote it on Christmas Day. And he must have read it countless times because it's quite dog-eared and almost torn where it folds. And you could see the tear stains that dropped while he was reading the letter. So we found that letter. So that separation, as you talk about, the only means of communication would be those letters. And so there's also a letter that I wrote when I was in grade 1 to my father. And I can't write Korean anymore. I lost that a bit. I can write it, but very slowly and terrible pachim.
Yeah.
But I have a letter that I had written from when I was 5 to my father. And again, it's just looking at myself through the 5-year-old eyes and what I was trying to convey to my father, letting him know that I was doing well in school and that I was taking care of my brother. So it's quite remarkable. But as you say, that separation was, thousands of miles and an ocean apart. And so how difficult it must have been, because my father left for his studies when my mother was pregnant with my younger sister. So she was 7 months pregnant. My brother would have been, my sister is 5 years younger than I am. So there were 2 young children and a 7-month baby when my father left to study his master's. So what would have happened to lead him to such a decision to go? For my mother to say, okay, honey, go and pursue your dreams.
Right.
Like the sacrifices that they had to make and to be separated for all those years. So yes, it was, it's quite amazing when you think about what my parents' generation, what your parents and your grandparents' generation had gone through.
Yes, I'm just kind of letting that kind of sink in because as you sharing it and you feeling it, I'm also feeling a version of that emotion. And yes, I'm just like, did you frame those letters?
I have it safely tucked away because they're very fragile and precious to me.
Yes.
But I probably should laminate them now that I think of it, because it will still be wear and tear over time.
Exactly.
But especially my mother's letter, it's telling. It tells a full story. For me, just imagining my father being alone. He did say he literally cried every day. In the shower on his own, working hard. He had to still support the family back home while he was studying. He was on a scholarship. He had no green card, but he had to try and work. So he would work until they discovered he had no green card, and then he'd find something else. So he saved literally every penny while he was away. And so there's another quite an emotional, significance behind KFC. Not Korean fried chicken, but Kentucky fried chicken. Mm-hmm. My father used to consume it voraciously, and as children, we knew he loved KFC, but we found out later that when he was in Chicago doing his master's, because he was saving every penny to send back home, he used to walk past a KFC almost every day to school and to his home, but he never once bought KFC to eat. So imagine smelling the aroma and wanting to eat something, and yet knowing that every cent had to be saved to be sent home. So when he used to eat it, so now that he's gone, we have KFC on his birthday, on his Memorial Day, remembering him through tears.
Yeah.
But our family gets quite emotional about KFC.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a ritual around it.
Well, you know what? I like a guilty indulgence for me is KFC.
Okay.
Yeah, but I always like it. I don't know. I just like the seasoning and something about it. But now when I have KFC, I have an additional layer to that story and I can only imagine like having KFC for a celebration of life or a birthday. Wow.
Because it reminds us of his sacrifice and just what he had to endure during his separation from the family. And so, and then I can envision him, like he loved KFC. He would eat every morsel right to the bone. So, and I didn't understand initially why, but now we do. So it has a very special place in our hearts.
It's just like this interview, there's no agenda. It's just trying to, so something came to my head, and that we live in a digital age, and we've kind of lost touch with the art of writing with a pen and paper. Because everything's instant, everything's text, everything's email. And I'm curious, because that piece of paper lasted the test of time, right? And I did not know that you have to fit it on a certain page and glue. Like, I did not know that. Like, I guess I was like pre-envelopes and pre-whatever. But it's kind of like today's, like, you have a certain amount of data you can use per day or per week or per month. But it was literally whatever you can fit on that piece of paper. And so you share how small the letters were.
Well, because imagine, you're writing this note to your husband so far away and you want to put as much into what you're saying. So it was beautifully written. It's quite poetic. And I knew both my parents loved literature. My father, this is a whole separate side, but my father in 1954, so that's the year after the signing of the armistice of the Korean War,
Yes.
he was the first graduate. He was in the first graduating class of Sungsil University, which is a private Christian university in Korea. It was originally in the north, and then it was reopened in South Korea. But he was a member of the first graduating class of that university, and his major back in 1954 was Shakespearean literature.
Wow.
So he first learned English up in the north, because my father was born in what is now North Korea,
Yes.
but there were Canadian missionaries that were already there. So I'm pretty certain, I don't have 100% proof, but I'm very certain that he must have learned English at a young age at one of the schools that the Canadian missionaries ran. He also had a tutor who ended up being a president of one of the top universities in Korea, but his wife was American. So he learned English when he was like 12, 13. So he loved the English language. So his first degree was English literature. Then he went to Korea University and did his master's in English literature. So for him to go abroad, that was his dream from a very young age. So the decision for my parents for him to take the scholarship and go to the United States while my mother was 7 months pregnant. Like, she complained to the day, he passed away literally, because it was hard for her. She had to feed 3 children, take care of my grandfather, my father's younger sister and brother lived with our family. So all that happened. But in terms of, just how much they loved one another and what my mother wanted to convey, like, she had to write about everything in that one little page. So on the back of it, she also wrote on the piece that shows when you mail it. So the address is on the front, and on the back side is the back, but she wrote on that side as well. So every part of that page was filled with her beautiful handwriting. And you can see where my father's tears would have dropped reading and rereading this beautiful letter. It's
Wow.
a treasure for me, literally.
Now, doing what you do, it's not a coincidence. I think. You know, I'm kind of like, because I've known you kind of at surface level, and we've bumped into each other at certain events
Yeah,
in the
through
past.
community.
Yes, yeah. But listening to the story that you have and who your parents were and the events that happened leading up to you coming to Canada, just like, it's not a coincidence that you're in your position that you are in, serving the country.
Well, I mean, first of all, that's quite a statement from you, and I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about my parents in a way publicly that I haven't necessarily gone into such detail. So you are bringing out in in me these memories and beautiful, emotive times in my life. And who I am today, yes, my parents were, I say, beautiful souls. You know, they, in our household, you know, in Korean there's polite and impolite versions of the language.
Yes.
There's 존댓말, 반말. But my parents always spoke 존댓말 to each other. And we always did that in the home. They never had, they didn't curse in front of each other, nor to each other. So we were raised in a very Christian, faith-filled home with parents who, their focus was us, and I knew that. But they both have their own stories of incredible loss and trauma. And I kind of heard bits and pieces through my mother's relatives. They sometimes showed, like, I knew they were war survivors of the Korean War because, you know, they're very frugal. As most immigrants were coming to this country, they came with, you know, $200 in their pocket at the time of immigration. So they had to build their lives out of nothing. So yes, if I know that you and I know you're a hard worker. I've seen you, and you've been very successful, and the fruits of your labor. I think I'm a tireless worker. I come by it quite naturally. My parents volunteered the whole time that I knew them. They volunteered for the church, and they volunteered in the community, in the schools that we attended. So I think, how could we not learn from the example of our parents? They are our first teacher. So yes, I can say that as a senator, I'm very, very hardworking. There's no time that goes wasted. And I do hear my mother's voice in my head almost on a daily basis, because from as long as I can remember, I would say since high school, she would say things like, she would say to me, go do everything I never had a chance to do. 내가 못한 거 네가 다 해라. So even as a working mom, she quit her job so she could take care of my daughter, so that I can go and work and just be a career professional and also be a mom. So she supported me in so many ways. But, you know, as a person who was born during the Japanese occupation, 1937, being liberated in 1945, my mom was born in Japan, and that's a whole separate story because of my grandfather. But they returned to Korea after the liberation of Korea. But my mother, you know, with the Korean War, with everything that happened, she never got to go to university. So, you know, like all Korean parents of that generation, there's so much loss, so much trauma. And because of that, you know, some of them really support and enable their children, and others become more protective. But my mother, just her mantra, like my mantra to this day, because of my mother, are her very words: do everything I never had a chance to do. So I take that with me every day in the work that I do.
Wow. Wow. I recently had a discussion with my oldest daughter about entitlement. So she was complaining about some small thing, and we have a discussion with our kids about being grateful and appreciative, not taking anything for granted, and the opposite of that, of appreciation or gratefulness, is entitlement. You know, when you take things for granted. But a generation that, like, that's my parents' generation as well. When my parents came in 1981, they were allowed $350.
Okay, so a little more.
A little more.
But I mean,
Inflation.
imagine.
Oh, what did your father study in Chicago?
He studied business administration. You know, interestingly, he had his Shakespearean
Yes.
degree, his English literature degree, so that did give him some great opportunities. His English was very good. So in Korea in those days, you can imagine, as Korea was having to rebuild after the war, a decade or so after the war. So he did have some good opportunities to work with American organizations, and he also worked for Hyundai in Korea. But I think it was his childhood dream to study abroad. It happened later than earlier. You know, it's just circumstances. My father was kind of the main bread earner for his family because he spoke English so well. So he never had a chance to do it earlier. He married late, and so this opportunity, you know, came after the fact. But you know, it happened to be business administration. I'm sure if he could have continued somehow with his English studies, whether it's teaching in a university or being a writer full time. I mean, even when he was lying down, he was writing in the air, something, poetry. And we have many books of his poetry, his own poems, as well as a lot of articles. He used to write for the Korea Herald as well. He would submit articles, and I think some of it was published, but he has binders upon binders of articles that he just wrote on various topics of interest, and topics that ranging in all subjects that he had written. So I have yet to do something with that collection. I know that I do need to do something to honor my father, but you know, life has been very busy. It's an excuse, so to speak,
yes.
But it's something that I hope to do in the future.
Senator, I would like to ask you about a little bit about, you know, get off the plane. It's your 7th birthday, April 11th, I believe. What was Vancouver like at that time? Do you remember?
Honestly, I have a terrible memory about my childhood. I just have certain vignettes that I remember. Obviously, Vancouver was... My mother said it was shigor. So it was like being in the countryside from my mom's perspective. Mm-hmm. So maybe that already explains. Compared to Seoul, it felt like shigor, the countryside to my mother. At the time, there were about 100 Korean families in all of the Lower Mainland. So there was one church. I believe there's over 200 Korean churches now in the Greater Vancouver area. So there was one church, and it was the place of community to gather once a week. And so I remember only seeing Koreans when I went to church. And other than that, I mean, I grew up in Vancouver, so believe it or not, it was fairly multicultural then as well. But in terms of the size of the Korean community, it was very small. Mm. But I remember having Chinese Canadian friends. I barely spoke English, but we somehow played together. So and I had one friend who, in grade 2, we used to cross Broadway. You know how big Broadway is? We used to cross Broadway together to go to school on 17th near Canby. So I lived in Vancouver at the time, and as little kids we would cross the biggest creek, one of the biggest thoroughfares in Vancouver today. So that's what Vancouver was like then. But it was still, in my neighborhood, somewhat multicultural in that it was for families that were new immigrants to Canada. So a lot of them spoke English like me, broken English.
Wow. Did you know my mom grew up in the 70s in Vancouver?
No, I didn't know that.
Yes. Do you remember when the first McDonald's opened up in off of Boundary?
Oh yeah, the boundary. Well, we used to go to that McDonald's every Sunday.
That was the first McDonald's in Vancouver.
Okay, well that I didn't know, but yes, then we would have been at that same McDonald's. I remember in the later years we would go to that McDonald's for $5 for the entire family. It was a bargain, so that was kind of a treat on a Sunday after church that my parents would take us to.
My mom worked
In the McDonald's?
in the McDonald's. She went to David Thompson High
Okay.
School. She probably arrived in Canada. Don't know the exact year. I should know. I'm going to ask her. But she went to David Thompson and worked the first McDonald's that was
Wow.
ever created or ever established in Vancouver.
So, yeah, so she must have memories too. I mean, I do remember my first day of school. It would have been in April, and it would have been near the end of grade 1.
Mm.
So, what I remember is I went to an annex, a Simon Fraser annex, and it was just a small building. The main school was on 17th near Canby, where I used to walk to
Yes.
with my friend. But that first day of school, for whatever reason, the teacher decided to call me up to the front of the class to read from the Basil Reader. Now, they must have been reading, when I think back, the Three Little Bears, because there was a picture of 3 bears on one side, and then there was the story. But she gave me the book, and I stood at the front. I didn't know a word of English. I didn't even know ABC. In those days, no Korean student learned English in school, right? 1972. So I remember looking at the book, and I just stared at it, and the teacher finally took her finger and she said, "How many?" And of course I didn't know what that meant, so I just continued to stare. And then she repeated herself louder and slower. "How many?" Now, I was the president of my grade 1 class in Korea. I could have been potentially president of my grade 2 class, so I prided myself in being a very good student.
Mm-hmm.
So I heard her twice say the same word, so I just looked at the picture and I took my finger exactly the way she did it, and I said, "How many?" And then the whole class erupted in laughter.
Yeah.
But as a 7-year-old, I knew that they were laughing at me, not for any other reason.
Mm.
So what I remember next is being under the stairs of the school, just looking out through the cracks of the stairs, out into the playground, and I was in a kimchi squat, and I just remember these big crocodile tears coming down my face. And in my head, I was remembering my grandfather and my ajumma and wanting to go back to Korea and just crying.
Mm.
So that was my first day of school. And 1 year later, what I remember on the playgrounds of the main Simon Fraser School is I heard kind of this almost bell in my head, and all of a sudden the noise became language.
Mm.
So I don't know how language acquisition happens for everyone, but for me, I remember that spring day 1 year later, where suddenly everything was language. I understood what people were saying.
Wow.
So that was interesting. I remember that very clearly.
What church did you attend at that? You said there was only like a handful of churches.
No, there was one church.
One church?
Yeah, it was the Korean United Church of Vancouver.
I see.
So everyone went to that church. The Korean language school, there's many now, but the first one was started out of that church. Everything just sort of started out of that church. It was more like a community center.
Do you remember Vancouver, I think, Presbyterian Church?
Yes, I think
Yeah.
that was one of the first churches that broke off. And
Yeah,
because the United Church was of many denominations.
Sure.
So then all these different denominations, eventually, including the Catholic Church, broke off and created their own church. So now there's over 200. So when you
Right.
think about the history of the Korean community, it came from 1 to over 200. That's where we are today.
My brain is going this way. Like, there is a very high percentage that my grandparents, which is my mom's parents, and my family would most likely have overlapped with yours.
Perhaps.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, most likely. Because my mother's the oldest of 4. She has 2 younger sisters and a younger brother.
Okay.
Yeah, and they would have been very, very similar ages
Right.
of Christian values.
Interesting.
And-
Well, I mean, I
Yeah.
haven't met your mother. I met your father. they would be interesting to,
Yeah.
cross paths one day, and maybe in the near future that's something we can arrange. But yeah, so some of these stories, if you were to ask your mother and interview your own mother, she might have some interesting parallels and experiences, because we did grow up in Vancouver together around the same time.
I might do that.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of questions for, and I don't necessarily know the reason why. I never asked, but now I'm really curious. Really curious. I'd like to touch on the topic of Korean War veterans. I believe recently our paths crossed again on now the works that have become where the Korean War veteran has become a curriculum piece in terms of education for all Canadians. And I'd like to thank you for your hard work and dedication, sacrifice for that. But can you, because I would want to be, like, always I have a deep appreciation for those people that have sacrificed and given it all for my freedom. And it's not fair for me to talk about taking for granted or entitlement. Like, we get to enjoy our freedoms because of other people laying down their life. Yeah. And I think it's my responsibility, our responsibility, to pay homage, to actively appreciate, not forget, tell the stories. So I know that you are much more closer and that you have many more stories, but can you just share a little bit about your heart?
Well, it's one of my favorite and most important subjects to talk about. And for me as a senator, I can tell you that I met the Korean War veterans and really understood what they did for Korea, and the fact that they volunteered to go. They didn't have to go, but they volunteered to go to help the people that they did not even know. They were, your grandparents and my grandparents, my parents as well. And so I have, because of them, and I met them very early on in my Senate tenure, and it has given me the foundation upon which I do almost anything. So I literally say I am standing on their shoulders. They're holding me up. And when I meet them, they have the most remarkable, like, their love for Korea is beyond measure. Mm. They say if Korea needed us again, we will be there. And they have, what they experienced in Korea was a terrible war. Korea was the second poorest country in the entire world at the time of the war in the 1950s. And no one really knew Korea at all. They didn't know where it was. But the Canadians who went, they were from, like, all across the country. There are people from small towns like Sudbury, Ontario, which is in the middle of Ontario. It's called Northern Ontario. And it's a small town. And at the time of the war, I know that 600 Sudburyans went to Korea. So young people. So imagine a town that's seeing 600 of their young people go off to war. I've met veterans who, this one Quebec veteran in Quebec City, he had 4 brothers, so there's 5 of them, and there's this wonderful picture of them all in uniform. And he said all 5 of them were prepared to go to Korea. And I asked Lord Arthur, how could your mother have even imagined to send all 5 sons to Korea? Now the youngest one was too young to go, so he had to stay behind. But he and 3 of his brothers went to Korea. Fortunately, they all came back, but I saw the picture of all 5 of them in uniform, because the youngest one joined the army while they were away.
Yes.
And he told me that his mother didn't question, because his father and his brothers all went to World War II, and his grandfather and great uncles went to World War I. So this was a family tradition in Quebec of service and sacrifice. So all of his brothers were going to go to Korea. So there are story after story. And there's one in Vancouver. He was a World War II veteran, and that's one of the reasons why Canadians had fewer casualties in Korea, where they had the experience of the World War II veterans go with them. And this one World War II veteran, he was a naval pilot, and he would go down into areas where people needed to be rescued. So he was not going to war to do something a little bit more arm's length. Like, he was going right into the most dangerous parts. But his third son was just born. He was a doctor with a very busy practice in Vancouver. So he left his family of 3, his youngest just born, to go and serve in the Korean War to be a naval pilot. So these are the stories of heroism that I have come across. So for me, my foundation of the service that I do for Canadians, like, I don't have to go and die for anyone. I am not leaving my family for months or over a year on end. I am able to do my work as a senator. So the veterans have guided my work in so many different ways. So I told you that I hear my mother's voice in one ear. The other voice I hear are veterans who, when the Korean soccer team, the women's soccer team, came to play in Canada a few years ago, they were in Montreal in one of the matches, and our veterans wanted to cheer them on. So they went to Montreal and they made these signs, and what they wrote was, "Be brave as we were brave." Wow. And when I heard that, I could only imagine the soccer players seeing such signs held up by veterans who were there to cheer them on. These veterans that were willing to die for Korea, to protect the Korean people and fight communist tyranny. You can only imagine what sort of, courage that they could muster up to play as hard as they could. So for me, like, I hear their voice. I hear their voice whenever I have to do something a little tougher, more challenging, maybe nerve-wracking, and I'm not always up for the challenge, but I muster up that challenge. I muster up the courage because I hear those voices. So they help me in so many ways. And yes, we owe our lives to them. Had they not gone, had other countries not gone to Korea's aid during the Korean War, Korea would have been lost to communist tyranny, and who knows what that entire region would be today. So Canadians were absolutely instrumental. There are certain battles that we can talk about, but I just know from my study, my experience of meeting the veterans and hearing their stories. There's one other veteran that comes to mind. He was also from BC, and his job was to crawl through the rice fields and look for mines that were in the fields. And he would be covered, and as you know, in those days, Korea fertilized their rice fields with human feces, yes. Right? That was the fertilizer. So he would have been covered in that, and he could only take a shower once a month. And my comment to him was, "Oh my goodness, how did you thank you so much. How did you manage to endure that?" And he said, "Well, I just look at the children. This was my job. I never thought second about it." So this was the kind of sacrifice, service that I have heard again and again. So the curriculum, we still have provincial governments that have to approve curriculum in the textbooks, but the project, we're talking about, and thank you so much for your amazing support to the project, the Korean War Legacy Project. It's an additional teaching resource that the teachers have created, and because it was created by the Social Studies Educators Network of Canada. They're a national group. There's teachers from all provinces and territories represented. They're going to take that teaching resource to their colleagues in their regions, to conferences, and from now on they will be able to share it. It's available online. So the fact that we have this legacy project completed is one step in ensuring the legacy is continued and taught in schools. The next step would be to work with provincial governments to have it in the actual textbooks. That's a whole separate initiative, and it's at the end of the day it would be kind of the decision of the Minister of Education of the day, so it's a bit of a political decision. So that's something I've been thinking about as a step two to continue to ensure the legacy is passed on.
Do you have a picture of that sign of that war veteran?
I have a photo somewhere which I can dig up.
I would love to see it. And I
Yes.
have an idea. As an entrepreneur, I'm constantly trying to make connections, and if you can find that picture, I'd love to share it on the interview on the podcast as well for
Let
our
me
viewers.
look for it. I
But,
know I've seen it, and it was sent to me because I didn't go to that game,
Sure.
but somebody who was there took a picture of the veterans standing in the stands holding up their signs. There were several signs, but that was one of them. And then it just it just reverberated in my mind, and it wouldn't go away. So now I hear that quite constantly.
And offline, I'll share what my idea is.
Okay.
But I'd love to see that photo and share it.
I'll do my best to find it, and if
Yeah.
not, I'm pretty sure I know someone that has the original photo.
Okay, that's amazing. Amazing. I can only that gave me chills. A war veteran, probably in his 80s, 90s.
Yes, they're all in their late 80s and 90s now.
Yeah, and they attending a soccer match and holding up that sign
Yes.
gave me chills.
I mean, it was in part organized by the Office of the Defense Attaché in Ottawa. They're responsible for doing various work with the veterans in Canada, but the fact that they organized themselves. I can't remember if they were wearing sort of a summer uniform, but something to distinguish themselves so that the players would know. They would have met the players for sure, but they were holding up their signs.
Well, I hope I don't forget, but I want to share a story that I heard. Because it wasn't just Canadians that sacrificed during the Korean War. I mean, there were Americans. There were...
There were 16 countries.
Yes, there are many countries that, but yes, we just happen to be Canada. We live in Canada.
Yeah, we were the
Yes.
third largest contingent. So it was
Yes.
led by the United States, the UN Special Force. The UK forces were the second largest, and then Canada is number 3.
So Koreans love chicken. So you mentioned KFC, Korean fried chicken, and I heard, and I think it's true, that during the Korean War, African American GIs would gather and make fried chicken, and Koreans would help.
Is this where the love of KFC comes from?
Because
Right.
Koreans have so many fried chicken
Yeah.
restaurants in Korea. They have over 80,000. That's
I didn't know that.
That's more than all. That's like, I don't know the number, maybe 5, 7, 8, 10 times more than any of all the KFCs in the world.
Wow.
So we love fried chicken.
Yeah.
I don't know. And then if you really think about our history, like, it doesn't go back to like kimchi, because we didn't have refrigeration, and we were always conquered, and we were always on the move. And so, yeah, we have fermented foods and whatnot, and also ramen. Ramen is is basically a national program to help people not starve. To have, it wasn't very nutritious, but at least it filled the belly. But where did fried chicken come from? And I heard a story that African American GIs would make their home recipes, and Koreans would help. And that's where the first, like, fried chicken, of course we kind of made our own version now, that's where it came from.
Yes, there's lots and lots of stories of the Korean War, and
Yeah.
then the remnants of that,
Yeah.
the legacy of the war that continues to this day. So very interesting.
Yeah, it is. And what can our generation and our children's generation do to continue to remember and honor the Korean war vets?
Well, first and foremost, we have to raise that awareness. So
Yes.
I would hope that as people of Korean descent, knowing that it is the 70th anniversary of the Korean War armistice this year. In 5 years' time, we're going to have the 75th. So it will start even before 2030, because the Korean War the 75th anniversary will start in 2 years' time, because like the Yu-Gi-Oh, the June 25th is an important marker for the Korean community,
Yes.
because the war isn't over. So the 75th anniversary years will begin in the next few years. So I'm already thinking about what we can do for that as a nation. So I have some ideas right now for that. But in terms of the community and the public at large, that's why the Korean War Legacy Project for educational materials, to bring it into the classrooms, is so important, that this generation, far removed from the war, does not forget what Canadians did in Korea to make the dynamic Korea of today possible.
Yes.
So I think it's a great opportunity now with K-pop and K-culture, K-food, everything K being so popular, for us to know that its success, the success of Korea today, did not happen by accident. It happened because of, and we need to ensure that we remember what happened in the war, post-war, and who contributed to ensuring that the Republic of Korea has survived to this day. So I think the success of Korea should, make us want to harken back and help remember that legacy even more, because the only way to go forward with continued success is to never forget. Otherwise, there's a chance. Korea is still at war.
Yes.
Anything is possible. So for us to remember where we've come from, I say we because you and I were both, born in Korea. We're daughter and son of Korea, and proud Canadians as we speak.
Yes.
But that's why, for me, I cannot ever forget where I've come from, because without Canadians and others who went to Korea, honestly, Korea could have and would have most likely fallen, and we would not be here today.
No.
We would not have the privileges, your children and my child. So I think that awareness and advocacy and supporting the initiatives in whatever way people can. And annually, we do have lots of ceremonies in our regions. So during the Battle of Gapyeong in April, there is a ceremony. June 25th, July 27th. So in BC, there is a Korean War Memorial at Burnaby Central Park. It is the only Korean War Memorial in Western Canada. Now there's some Gapyeong memorials as well, but it's the main memorial, and there are ceremonies. So it'd be amazing to see more students, more families attend the ceremonies that take place usually at 11 a.m. And there'll be one on Remembrance Day as well, a little bit later, probably at 3:30 p.m. But these are the kinds of activities, so we can remember, but we can physically take part, and we can physically support our veterans in what ways we can. And like I said, there's the 75th coming up, and it's a very important anniversary. And I think that Korea probably is planning to do some major commemorative events and programs for that. And in Canada, I'm hoping to do the same with the government of the day, work with the Veterans Affairs Ministry. And then, like I said, the Legacy Project Phase 2 would be to try and get it into the actual curriculum textbooks that teachers are using. That would be to ensure that the legacy is continued.
Well, I look forward to continue our conversation offline, just to see how I can be mobilized with my network and influence to be able to continue on remembering, never forgetting, and honoring. I think that's such an important task.
Yes, and one thing you just said, makes me think about what can we do? We can be just highly successful people who are aware, who can then raise that awareness too. And Korea's success has been one of the greatest, way of honoring the veterans. They know that their sacrifice was not in vain. Many of them have not been able to go back to Korea, but they will drive their Hyundai and Kias and own their Samsungs and LGs. So the fact that Korea is so successful today, they feel more proud. You can imagine their pride, and they feel so validated that what they did in Korea was worth it.
Right.
So that our success as individuals, as Korea as a nation, will be one of the greatest ways to honor our veterans.
Yes. for the last, I guess, segment of our conversation, Yonah, is this book that I wrote called The Power of Today. And really it's a framework for myself. And I've used it with my teams and other companies and other groups for a framework of thinking of every day, of what we need to kind of check off to be highly successful, productive. Also, whatever metric we use for success, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't just have to be monetary, but impact, influence, whatever it is. And I like to. Today is an acronym. So TODAY, and there's a 2 on the end of the Y because the last letter stands for yield, and there's 2 meanings of yield in English that we commonly use. But what do these letters and these concepts mean to you is going to be very, very valuable for me. So the first letter, time, in the framework, T is for time. And I share a story in the book called, it's MJ. So as we were starting Inno Foods, the largest organic snack foods company in the world, the very, very early days where we were struggling, MJ, Korean student, needed a company to sponsor her for her working visa, and she was amazing. One of the hardest working people in our group, and I remember sitting down with her and saying, "Yes, we'd like to offer you a job. We'd like to sponsor you so that you can get your working visa and continue to work and live in Canada." And 3 days later, she didn't show up to work. The person a manager that used to pick her up from the Lougheed SkyTrain station waited for 30 minutes. But it was out of character that she wouldn't pick up her phone or respond to a text message. She returned to the factory, which is about 5 minutes drive, and told ownership and management that she waited, didn't show up. That day, we found out she got struck by a truck and passed away.
Oh my goodness.
Right. So remember, a very, very tough time. Our company helped out with the funeral and whatnot. It was a very, very tough time. Time stands for our attitude towards it, how we treat it. And don't get me wrong, I love life. I love living. And it's a true gift. But I'm not so naive to think that I'm invincible or I'm immortal. Today or even tomorrow, something can happen and I'm finite, I can pass. So, but I believe that that's like very healthy in terms of knowing that, time is very, very precious. So I'd like to have your take on how you treat time and what you think about the concept.
Wow, well, what a story of this young woman and, this first letter, what it stands for. So I am always, at times, I shouldn't say always, I'm often racing against time. Time is ticking. It's kind of, then this moment, the next moment. But 2 things come to mind. I know that I had to learn to compartmentalize the tasks that I need to do, that all I have is kind of what's in front of me, that I can't think about what is waiting for me or what has already happened. So I had to just really compartmentalize, and I learned that quality over quantity was more important, because that was the only way I could do my job when I have multiple things happening and demanding my time and attention. So I work between Ottawa and BC. There's a 3-hour time difference. I had an 11-year-old when I first started politics, And my father passed away just before I was appointed. My mother had Alzheimer's, and eventually she passed away 2 years ago. So there was a lot of demand of time to me to be with family, but I could only be with my daughter a certain time. So I learned that the time that I have with her right now in front of me was the most important time, and if I just had the quality interaction, it made up for any lost time that I couldn't be with her. So I learned that, and I had to for my own sanity. But my mother, who eventually, basically she didn't have any concept of time. She didn't know who she was. She didn't know who I was. She didn't know who anything was. She had lost all things, but, interestingly, she never forgot that she was a child of God. So that was amazing to me, that she would light up and I said, Haimai, we called her Haimani, or I called her Kwansan name, because she was an eldress in a church, and she would respond to that. She wouldn't respond to her name, but when I said Kwansan name, she'd look up, and so she knew she was loved by God. She was with God. But when I was with her, she would not remember the next time I see her that of the time we had before. So she taught me that whatever time I had with her in the moment was the time that was the most important. So sometimes I had 30 minutes before I had to go to Ottawa, catch my flight to go home, to go to work, and I would have 30 minutes to do a whole routine with her. I had to clean her from top to bottom and dress her and make sure she was ready for the week. And it was a bit of a ritual, but what I had to do was just focus on who was in front of me, the task in front of me, and that she would not remember this moment, nor will she remember the next time, but that right now while I'm here, while she's smiling at me and looking at me, this is the time we had. So my times with her, I treasure them to this day, and I know that I did everything I could as a daughter. It was limited, but it was how I treated that time. So that's how I kind of try and compartmentalize the things that I need to do in a 24-hour day. I suppose when you look at 24 hours, we have a lot we can do in a day. So being able to focus on that person in front of you, on the task that you're doing, then you can accomplish moment by moment to the best of your ability, whatever it is you're going to do.
Yes.
So what I hope I've demonstrated to you is that I've been here present with you in this conversation and not thinking about whatever's waiting for me or whatever may have happened that I have regrets about. So I've learned to compartmentalize and really focus and use the time, I guess, very efficiently and wisely.
Yes.
And treat it as precious time.
Amazing. Amazing. O stands for opportunity. And I believe that we really need to be open to opportunity. Before that, we need to prepare. We need to prepare ourselves, always. I believe the people that are prepared, that are preparing, take advantage of opportunities. But do you remember an instant in your life that you said yes, and that led to doors opening? That led to maybe making a connection or meeting somebody that was instrumental?
Well, that's interesting description of opportunity, which I absolutely agree. The way I try and, I guess what I sort of see is that, there's time is, of course you're always in the moment, but there's a sort of moving, not a treadmill, but it's just kind of moving, and as you're going and passing each moment, the opportunity, sometimes you see them coming, other times they just sort of appear and you can literally grab it, and some kind of literally fall into your arm. So for me, politics sort of happen like that.
Yes.
So you're right that it's up to us to prepare. So what do? Well, your whole life is a prelude to this moment. So everything you've done, you don't even know how it's going to serve you.
No.
But that's what happened to me, is that my work doing nonprofit work, I started C3 inspired by my daughter. We didn't talk about that, but that was one of the things that happened for me, that I was teaching full time. I really thought of that as my ministry. As a Christian, I think about what God is calling me to do, and I loved my teaching career. But nonprofit work came into my life through a need to do something for my daughter, to create a space for her, and yet I found the space for myself, which is often what happens. The more you give, you get back tenfold. So I was doing these 2 full-time jobs, plus I was volunteering for my church, so I had a lot of things on my plate, but politics literally kind of almost landed like in my hands,
right.
This opportunity. So had I not been ready through all the training that I got as, teaching Sunday school, it was my training for becoming a teacher, actually. Church trained me for teaching. Education trained me to do a lot of other things, to be an effective communicator, for one. And then the nonprofit work just really gave me that. Well, I had a servant's heart throughout, but it was just the opportunity to do something beyond just the work.
Sure.
And so the volunteerism, which is so powerful. So yes, the opportunity, just when you're ready, you can seize it, you can grab hold of it, you can wait for it. But I think that readiness is so important. I absolutely agree with you on that.
Yes. Well, D stands for development, and it's kind of like getting ready, preparing, but is there something that you do on a day-to-day or season-to-season basis that is sharpening the sword, that continue to learn, continue to hone skills that you can share?
I'm a former educator, but once a teacher, always a teacher. And one of the things that teaching taught me was just how wonderful it is to be a lifelong learner. So I was learning as much as I was teaching. I probably learned more from my students than the other way around, but in order to be a good teacher, you have to constantly be learning. So there's a lot of professional development that you do. And so I used to be a very avid reader. I still read a lot, but it's mostly legislative, political things. But just the books and podcasts now, sometimes I can multitask and listen to things. So just to really go beyond the depth of a subject matter, I really love history, and that's why I've enjoyed meeting our veterans. So I think I feel that I'm a lifelong learner, so I'm always open to what I'm going to learn. So I know that when I show up to something, of course I'm invited as senator, and I've prepared what I need to do for that particular event. But honestly, 9 out of 10, if not 10 out of 10 times, there is something I learn from being present. So I'm constantly learning. So I think being open to just whatever it may be, a conversation, something that you listen to or read, that's all very, very, that's all part of shaping who you are, and all of that prepares you for the next moment. So I do that on a daily basis. I'm doing that from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. And of course I love to just see the news from all around the world and just see what's happening in this world. So for me as a politician, there's certain things that I have to do to prepare for my job. But number one is just being aware of what's happening in the community, in the world around me.
A stands for assessment, and I believe that we have to really a lost art of thinking, critical thinking. And for me, it means a daily basis of...
Sorry, A stands for?
Assessment.
Assessment.
And I know that one of my habits is kind of reviewing, as I review the day, I think back to yesterday and saying, what could I have done better? What didn't quite work out and why? I believe that we really have a lack and this lost art of critical thinking and assessing, maybe if it's themselves or the situation. Is this skill important to you in your day-to-day life and work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, as a teacher, assessment was part of what I did on a day-to-day basis with my students, individual as well as group. But for me as a politician, the stakes are pretty high for any mistakes that we make, and sometimes the consequences match, like the gravity of the situation.
Yes.
So, what happened to me early on, and I'm grateful. So what I do is, like, in some respects, failure, my attitude toward failure is one that I think has really helped me, which is, it's something that happens. Like, I'm not the failure, it's not me, but it's something that happens. So I have to learn from that mistake and then do it better the next time. So I've learned that I can make my own mistakes, I can observe and see the mistakes of others,
Yes.
and learn from other people's mistakes. Now that is preferred, but sometimes you do make your own, and I
Yes.
guess sometimes those are the lessons that stick with you the most. But I've done both in my career. Someone told me early on that, about the stakes being very high, and that you can, if you can learn from others' mistakes, so to have mentors to observe and just be aware that you can learn a lot just by watching other people. But what happened early on in my career is I was in a meeting with my colleagues. These are senators. And I was responsible for something, and I was asked whether it was ready. Now, in that moment, I should have said, I'm not sure, I need to check. But I was feeling self-conscious about proving to my colleagues that I was capable. So I said, it just came out of my mouth. I said yes. Now that yes created a whole series of events that followed, and it took me 2 weeks to catch up to my answer. I almost, like, every day, the fact that I couldn't quite catch up to the yes, because a lot of things happened because of my response. So the fact that I had to, like, do more to try and catch up to it, and I was losing sleep over it. I practically, like, fainted after I said it, because I thought, oh my gosh, what have I just done?
Yes.
So I learned from that mistake. So now what comes out of my mouth, and I say to my interns, I say to my staff and to myself, really be impeccable with your words. Even one word, like yes. So that was from the failure, the mistake that I made at that time. So I'm grateful for such a mistake, that it didn't cost me something grave, and that I was able to rectify the situation, because I was able to catch up to it. But it may have gone way ahead of me, and then who knows what could have happened. So that was a really, really good lesson. So I do definitely learn from my mistakes.
Share with my kids all the time, learn through precepts or learn through pain.
Yeah.
Right? Regret.
Yes.
Right. Last letters, why? It's yield. It's one of the most important ones for me. Apart from time, I think. Just after time, it's yield. And one is to produce a yield, right? And for me, I need to, before the sun goes down, I need to be able to show something for my work that day. So it's like a farmer. You can't pretend to be a farmer, right? In this digital age, we have a lot of intentions, and a lot of the time we can equate our intentions to productivity. But as a farmer or as a carpenter, you can't just say, I intended to plant today, or prune, or water, because the results will show. So it's very important for me to tangibly show a yield every single day, no matter how small. Second is to yield, is to submit. And I believe that life is more than just about ourselves. It's about, a big portion is service. And a lot of the times it's service to other people that can't reciprocate. What does the word mean to you?
It's a great word. And I have not applied it in my life, I have to say, in the way that you're describing. But I can see now why it's why too, and how important both of those meanings are in one's application. So in my own way, I guess I definitely, I see some of my colleagues retiring. I see, members not being reelected. And then just in life where people leave a position. So what do they have to show for that? but you do that on a daily basis as to what did you achieve on that day. So for me, I know in 2011, one of the things that, because it takes a couple of years to get your feet grounded. So for me, the first 2 years it was a steep learning curve, and I just wanted to survive and do well, and I did get sick a few times in my first year, because the stress, the weight of what I was doing was really, really heavy. But in 2011, when I was finally able to just really think about what it is that I was called to do. It really was a calling. So politics was my calling from a higher power, for me, God. Not everybody believes in God, but it really was a call, and I had no idea that I was going to be called to politics in the way I was, and the fact that it landed in my lap and everything sort of aligned for me to be able to enter in my first nomination race back in 2006. And so in 2011, I decided to start an internship program. And in essence, it's kind of combining my love of education and teaching, which I left. I didn't want to leave, but it was this calling. So here I am in politics. So I was able to create a program that I could mentor the next generation of leaders, whether it's politics or not. I follow many of my interns, and they're doing different things with their lives, and they are healthy, thriving professionals out in the world doing good work. So to be, mentoring is a really important responsibility. So for you to, live what you're preaching. So just to be the example of the kind of servant leader that you're showing to your mentees and whatnot. So I think the internship program that I was able to create has been one of those, the fruits of my labor, so to speak. When I hear from my interns the next venture that they're going on. One of them actually is coming to dinner tomorrow night. He's from Toronto, but he's in town, and he's always doing something exciting. So what I said earlier, that success is our greatest gift to our veterans.
Yes.
So in essence, my interns, like their success is so rewarding to me. So that's how, for me, the work that I do, the smallest of tasks, and this is what I say to my staff, we don't know what is happening in the lives of our stakeholders, our constituents, when they come to us with an issue or a problem or a request. So how we, address them with a real warmth and genuine friendliness, and then the smallest of things that I do for someone, that I don't know what the ripple effect is ultimately for many of these situations, but to know that I've done my best, and I know that there's evidence of the fruits of my labor. I don't need to see it all, because I already know, even for me, like there are people who made a difference in my life, and I haven't necessarily been able to go back and say, look what's happened, since you did that for me. So there are people in our lives that we have received from, so it's natural for us to give back. So in essence, what you're talking about is, for me, the yield piece is definitely speaking to the Christian in me, and the fact that my father was dying in the hospital, and it was a terrible time for me to enter politics.
Yes.
I resisted it, and I thought it was just selfish to kind of do something like that, but it was a calling that I felt. So sometimes, I have had examples of just being, I just know I'm guided by my gut instinct where God is in every breath that I take, and to know that what I'm doing, if I'm doing it with the right frame of mind, with the right heart, that it will produce those results too. So that's a really, really wonderful letter or acronym, and the fact that it's part of your book. I mean, these words have all meant a lot to me. So I think it's going to resonate with all of your readers. So I'm definitely going to take the Y2 and apply that in my life in the way that you have described as well.
Amazing. Well, I'd like to just end off by saying thank you for being such a great connector and a role model and hero for many. And And thank you for your friendship, and really appreciate your story, your life, and your service as well.
Well, you've been a great, I don't even want to say interview because it's been a conversation and you've shared a lot. So today I'm leaving with so much as well, just so you know. So thank you so much for having me.